Mr. and Mrs. Mbogo were successful business people who worked hard, but they always had little time for their 4 children. Adia, the eldest, was 12 years old. She was smart and responsible, always helping her mother take care of the younger ones. One evening, Mr. and Mrs. Mbogo had been making phone calls and having serious discussions all day. As Adia played with her brothers in the living room, her parents came into the room dressed to leave. "Adia," Mrs. Mbogo said gently, kneeling down with her daughter, "your father and I have to go to a very important meeting. We won't be long, but while we're gone, I need you to take care of Kato, Kamali, and Nito, okay?" Adia nodded, acknowledging her mother's request. With that, the Mbogos kissed their children goodbye and walked out the door. As the hours passed, the Mbogos weren't back home and were not reachable. Adia began to worry. Her parents should have been home by now. She sat up in bed, listening for the sound of their car pulling into the driveway, but the house remained silent. She told herself they were just late, that the meeting was taking longer than expected. She tried to stay calm, but the uneasy feeling in her stomach grew stronger as the night went on. It was morning and there was still no sign of her parents. Adia didn't know what to do. She was scared but didn't want to worry her brothers. She would wait a little longer, she thought. Surely they would come back soon. Later that morning, there was a knock at the door. Adia's heart skipped a beat as she rushed to open it, hoping it was her parents. But when she opened the door, she found 2 police officers standing there. Their faces were serious. "Are you Adia Mbogo?" one of the officers asked softly. Adia nodded. "I'm very sorry, Adia," the officer said gently. "We found a car matching your parents' vehicle. It was badly burned, and we don't believe anyone survived." The words hit Adia like a punch to the stomach. Her legs felt weak, and her hands trembled. The officer's words echoed in her head, but she couldn't make sense of them. Her parents were gone? How could that be? Tears filled her eyes as she cried very badly. Kato and Kamali didn't fully understand what was happening, but they could see the sadness in Adia's face, and they clung to her, confused and scared. The officers offered to take the children to stay with a relative, and soon they were on their way to a place they had never been before. The Mbogo children were taken to live with their Uncle Bernard, their father's older brother. Uncle Bernard lived far from the city in a small, dusty town. Unlike Mr. and Mrs. Mbogo, who were kind and loving, Uncle Bernard was cold and stern. He had never been close to his brother, and he didn't seem happy to take in the children. When they arrived at Uncle Bernard's house, it was clear that their lives would be very different from what they had known. The house was small and old, with no garden for the children to play in. Uncle Bernard didn't have much, and he wasn't interested in making the children feel welcome. Instead, he gave Adia a long list of chores. "You're the oldest," he said gruffly. "It's your job to take care of your brothers and sister now. Don't expect me to help." Adia was already used to helping at home, but here, things were much harder. She had to wake up early every day to make breakfast, clean the house, and take care of Kato, Kamali, and baby Nito, all by herself. Uncle Bernard didn't lift a finger to help, and he never had kind words for Adia. He seemed angry all the time, especially when he talked about her parents. "They were greedy, your parents," he would say, shaking his head. "Always running after more money. Look where it got them." Adia didn't like the way Uncle Bernard talked about her parents, but she didn't say anything. She knew she had to be careful around him. She kept her head down and did her chores, always making sure her brothers and sister were safe and fed. The twins missed their parents and cried often, and Nito was too young to understand what had happened, but she often cried at night, missing her mother's comforting arms. Adia was exhausted. Every day she carried Nito on her back while doing her chores, sweeping the floor, cooking and fetching water. The twins needed help with everything, and there was never a moment when Adia could rest. But she didn't complain. She couldn't. There was no one else to help, and she loved her brothers and sister too much to let them suffer. At night, Adia would lie in bed, her body aching from all the work, and think about her parents. Weeks passed, And as Adia was putting Nito to sleep, she overheard Uncle Bernard having a conversation with someone in the living room. "They still have them," he whispered. "It's better this way." Adia's heart raced. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. They still have them? Were they talking about her parents? Could her parents still be alive? She quickly moved away from the door, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. Her mind was spinning with questions. If her parents were still alive, why had the police told her they were dead? And why wasn't Uncle Bernard doing anything to help them? Adia felt a mix of fear and hope. If her parents were alive, she had to find a way to help them. But how? She was just a 12-year-old girl with no money and no power. One night, while cleaning Uncle Bernard's room, Adia found something shocking. Hidden in the drawer of his desk were letters. These letters were from the kidnappers, demanding money for her parents' release. Uncle Bernard had known all along. He had been in contact with the kidnappers, but instead of paying to save his brother and sister-in-law, he had been ignoring their demands, hoping that he would get their money for himself. That night, as she lay in bed, Adia thought about what to do. She knew she couldn't go on alone. The letters were proof, but she needed to get them to someone who could help her, someone who wouldn't be afraid of Uncle Bernard. Then it came to her. The police. They were the ones who had told her about her parents' accident, but they didn't know the full story. If she brought them the letters, maybe they could help find her parents. The next morning, after Uncle Bernard left the house for one of his mysterious meetings, Adia walked quickly down the dusty road, her heart pounding with every step. When she finally reached the small police station, she was exhausted, but she didn't let that stop her. She walked straight up to the front desk and asked to see the officer in charge. She explained everything to her, and the officer stood up, her expression serious. "You did the right thing by bringing this to us, Adia. We're going to take this very seriously. Stay here for a moment." The officer disappeared into another room, leaving Adia alone with her thoughts. She felt a mixture of relief and fear. She had done it. She had told the truth. But what would happen next? The police acted swiftly. With the letters in hand, they opened an official investigation. After weeks of investigation and questioning, they found a location. The police wasted no time. They organized a rescue mission, and one bright morning, they stormed the warehouse. Inside, they found Mr. and Mrs. Mbogo, tired and weak but alive. The kidnappers were arrested, and the parents were finally free after months of captivity. The day Adia's parents were rescued was a day she would never forget. She and her siblings were brought to the police station where their parents were waiting. When Adia walked into the room and saw her mother and father, her heart swelled with joy. Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time in months, she felt safe. "Adia!" Mrs. Mbogo cried, rushing forward to embrace her daughter. "Oh, my brave girl, you saved us!" She wrapped her arms around Adia, holding her tightly. "We missed you so much," she whispered. Mr. Mbogo hugged Adia too, and then the twins and baby Nito, who gurgled happily in her father's arms. "We owe everything to her," the officer said. "If it weren't for Adia, we might never have found you." Uncle Bernard, on the other hand, didn't escape justice. When the police confronted him with the evidence, including the letters and the confession from the kidnapper, he had no choice but to admit his involvement. He was arrested for his role in the kidnapping and would spend many years in prison. Life slowly returned to normal for the Mbogo family. They moved back into their home, where the laughter of the children filled the house once again. But things weren't quite the same as before. Adia had grown up in a way that no 12-year-old should have to. She had taken care of her brothers and sister all by herself, and she had been the one to uncover the truth about her parents' disappearance. Mr. and Mrs. Mbogo couldn't stop telling her how proud they were. "You are a hero, Adia," her father said one evening as they sat together in the garden. "You were so brave. We will never forget what you did for our family." Adia smiled, feeling the warmth of her father's words. She didn't feel like a hero. She had only done what she had to do to keep her family together. but hearing her father say those words made her heart swell with pride. She had learned that even in the darkest of times, courage and love could light the way. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. Thank you for watching and see you next time.